Welcome. My name is Joe Waz. I'm delighted to be back here with so many of you who I've been seeing here over the years at TPRC, and some of you all the way back to Annapolis days. And it is wonderful to be here celebrating the 40th anniversary of TPRC in the best way I know how, which is to look forward to the future with this particular panel tonight. And we'll have more reflections on history with a terrific panel tomorrow night. Let me quickly introduce your panel from your left to right. Dave Clark from MIT, Tom Hazlitt from George Mason University in the Law School, Ellie Noem from Columbia University, and Gigi Sohn with Public Knowledge. Would you join me in welcoming everybody? So we have here a really good cross-section of some of the most learned and also the most, I'd say in a lot of respects, the most colorful leaders in our field, representing law, economics, and engineering. So it's a terrific opportunity to hear from folks representing different constituencies and viewpoints and disciplines. We want to get their ideas, and we want to get your questions about a future research agenda in communications broadly defined, as we tend to do here at TPRC. And we want to discuss with them what some of the most important research work is that they see in these various disciplines in the years ahead. Maybe draw out some sleeper issues that haven't been on our radar yet and gotten the attention they deserve. And also drill down a bit on the question of how the research community does and should, or sometimes in the opinion of some, does not and should not interact with government. I think there's an important role to be played by the research community in setting public policy. There's also an important role to be played by the research community in monitoring public policy and the performance of institutions. And so we'll talk a bit about that tonight, including some direct experience some of our panelists have with working with some of the agencies. So let's kick it off, and I'll start with Dave and give each of our speakers about 10 minutes to give us their take on what research issues belong on our collective future research agenda. Dave.
Okay, thank you. So I have a sort of a tangled topic I wanted to talk about, and I decided that the statement I would start with is we are dealing with a fact today, which is the cost of usage is cheap but not free. And I think that's problematic. There are people who say, well, it's essentially free. We are at a transition point now where, to a large extent because of streaming video and the transition of other video applications onto the internet, we see a tremendous uptake in usage. And I think it's important to get an order of magnitude sense around this. A typical user today on a wireline system may send 30 gigabytes a month. Back of an envelope estimates if we moved all of television onto over-the-top and, to exaggerate the story, delivered it in the least effective way, which would be unicast, that number might multiply by a factor of maybe 10, 20, 30. So instead of sending 30 gigabytes a month, you might send 300, 600, 900 gigabytes a month. That's a substantial number, of course, depending on how fast it happens. If you're in a wireless world, you're in much worse trouble because typical monthly caps today are 3 gigabytes a month. So if somebody said, hey, let's watch all the video on a wireless device, the answer, you need to increase the capacity of the system by at least a factor of 100. There's actually an interesting technical fact in there. We tend to talk about broadband today by characterizing it in terms of peak speed. Oh, I have 100 megabits today and I want a gigabyte, because that's sort of what Moore's law teaches us. But if you look at processors, something interesting happened. We used to say, well, the clock's getting faster, the clock's getting faster, and we stopped making the clock faster. All of a sudden, it's how many cores do you have? How many cores do you have? We changed the dimensionality of what we thought was an improvement along Moore's law. And I think we are at a transition now where, in fact, the metric of broadband is not going to be how fast does it go, but it's how many bytes a month can you send, or how many peak period bytes a month can you send, or something. We're actually going to have to redefine what the metric is. And we're now reaching the point where the cost of usage actually matters. And so this manifests in a lot of debates which are sort of around the edge. Should we have usage-based tiers? Should the developing world try to suck money out of the developing world by using Wicket to convert the internet into a sender pays architecture? There's all kinds of things that are manifesting around this question, but the high-level question that I think we're dealing with, and it's a research question here, which is do we believe that over the next 10 years, the internet ecosystem is going to remain healthy? And this is to a certain extent what Rebecca was talking about. There are a lot of people who put a lot of capital in play. And one of the questions I keep looking for documentation on, and as a technologist, of course, I'm completely out of my field here, is when you invest in upgrading your infrastructure, what's the return on investment? Now, my intuition is I pay Comcast $45 a month, and if they upgrade their infrastructure, I pay them for $45 a month. That says ROI is zero. That's an amateur's answer to the question, but I think there's a serious research question here, and it's not for the next year. It really is a question over the next 10 years. Are we going to increase the capacity of the consumer-oriented internet by a factor of 100? How is that going to be paid for? Is the ecosystem healthy? One answer, of course, is we pray to the gods of competition. And I'm a little snarky about this because Comcast, I think, is the unwelcomed recipient of a possible victory, which is maybe Verizon and AT&T dropped out of the race. And maybe they're going to be the last, and all of the cable companies are going to be the last company standing. And, in this context, I was back reading the National Broadband Plan from the FCC, and this is our current, and I'm being really nasty here, this is our current view of how regulators should encourage the health of the internet, and I'm quoting, forgive me. Instead of choosing a specific path for broadband in America, the plan describes actions government should take to encourage more private innovation and investment. The policies and actions recommended in this plan fall into three categories: fostering innovation and competition in networks. ... Do we actually know how to foster competition in networks? Is that the government's job? I'm the technologist. I'm asking the other people, do we know what that means? Or are we looking at competition as some sort of pixie dust we sprinkle on problems to make it go away? I would echo what Rebecca said in this place. And most people who go back and look at the relevance of the Telecom Act says no. So that's another 10-year question. What should that law look like in 10 years? I wanted to bring up another thing, and I don't know much about it, so I'm simply going to mention it and then hand the mic down the path. But this also came up in some of the discussion today about the ITU and Wicket and so forth. I think the internet was built by a world of dreamers, and one of the things we believed in was this ubiquitous global platform of sort of open communication. And I think it's pretty clear, if you want to continue to be a dreamer, that's fine, but I think that vision was a nice dream, but it was a dream. What we see is the emergence of jurisdictional boundaries, tremendous emergence, not just in the commercial structure of the heterogeneity of the internet, but the global heterogeneity of the internet. And I would ask a question: have we actually thought about, in that space, if we can't have our ideal, what's the preferred second best, and what would it look like? Do we try for the grand compromise? Do we let the internet slide into a much more partitioned space where we can have the internet we want in exchange for which China gets the internet we want and we stop snarking at them about it? Do we know what actions we would take to influence the international landscape of the internet in our best interest, if I speak domestically, or in the best interest of the world, if I speak globally? I brought that up with much less background because that's not my expertise, but I think these are two of the important things we're going to deal with over the next 10 years.
Thanks, Tom?
Thanks very much. And I should say before I get started on my comments, and by the way, I'm not speaking to the audience here. I'm speaking for the time capsule. I know TPRC is going to release our comments in 40 years.
Ooh.
To the shock and horror of TPRC in 2052, they'll be asking themselves, what's an iPhone? You know, things like that. What was that thing he had ringing on in his pocket? No, I wanted to say that Dean of the Law School at George Mason University, Daniel Polsby, who is a big supporter of TPRC and is a great scholar and, did I say, a wonderful man to work for. He could not be with us tonight. He is out in Fairfax at the main campus at George Mason University, kissing up to the new president of George Mason University, you see. So I'm left to kiss up to him with my recorded comments about what a marvelous dean he is, and he is a big supporter of TPRC, and he's the one that arranged this donation in kind, I guess. So I want to welcome you all on behalf of Dean Polsby, who loves having TPRC meet here and loves being able to help. You may know that I didn't have anything to do with arranging this deal. I can't even get a parking space here, so wouldn't make much sense to rely on me now, would it? Okay, so thanks so much for putting me on the panel. And I'm just trying to say, I don't know what the opposite of Ellie Noam is right now because he hasn't spoken yet, but I'm gonna shoot for it. Something very strange happened though earlier tonight, and that was that Ellie was working on his remarks more than an hour before this panel. That might be a health issue there. I don't know what's going on. A little nervous. I do miss those days when we did the slides, those hand slides, and Ellie would actually do them in the taxi on the way over. And you could sort of chart his whole route to the event by seeing the slides and the stuff that kind of squiggled when you got up on the screen. Anyway, Joe's asked us to talk a little bit about research agendas, and I don't know if that's exactly what I'm going to say, but let's see if it gives anybody a research idea. So we're right here in 2012, and I'm not going to talk about the transition to an all IP network. Okay, that's in the broadband plan. That'll be simple. I'm going to talk about what's going to happen over the next 40 years that's more challenging and interesting. Right now today we're at this intersection of nanotechnology and just the very front margin of the wireless network deployment that is really rocking social institutions. That's now unstoppable. And the next colossal game changer, I'm going to venture a guess, this is my 40-year guess, you can't prove me wrong until you crack this thing open down the road, is going to be mobile health. So we're already, 6 billion of us, we're already carrying around these network-connected computers on our bodies 24/7. We sleep with them. We recharge when they recharge. We're just exploring the outer edges of biomonitoring, and we see some of these applications coming in. Diagnostics, patient schooling, you get a nasty text when you forget to take your meds. Now soon, if we overcome the privacy issues, I think we will, but those will be challenging, the research topics there, we'll be probing and testing in continuous time what's going on internally with your body to network-connected computers, and that'll be interesting in terms of controlling and preempting disease. But more importantly, perhaps, we'll be amassing real-time data documenting exactly what those vital signs and white blood counts were for the last 10 million heart attacks, all through it in real time. So that'll be fairly interesting data, okay, to put the heart attack data mildly. So all this pretty amazing new stuff wants more bandwidth. And along the way, the roadblocks preventing radio spectrum from being deployed in its highest valued use will need to fall because of the great advantages, social advantages and economic growth that are available through unleashing more of these deployments, more of these applications. There will be tremendous pressure to push those barriers back. We've seen some of it already, we'll see more. So I believe that in many places these barriers will fall, and it really is hard to see where the 1927 spectrum allocation system makes it to 2052. I just find that hard to believe. In fact, let's look back. 40 years ago, auctioning spectrum use rights was a pipe dream. In 1977, two FCC commissioners noted that competitive bidding for wireless licenses had about as much chance as did the Easter Bunny in the Preakness. That is a quote from an FCC document, okay? They should have bet on the bunny. But all the communications experts opposed it, not only opposed it, but savagely mocked Those who put the idea forward, Ronald Coase, who would later win a Nobel Prize in economics for related work, found that the Rand Corporation would not publish his 1962 paper that they had paid and commissioned because it was found by expert referees too incendiary. It would discredit the think tank. One referee wrote, "I know of no country on the face of the globe, except for a few corrupt Latin American dictatorships, where the sale of the spectrum could be even seriously proposed." Well, that's a pretty good endorsement. So New Zealand and then India and the United States decided to do it. Auctions were adopted. Those policymakers who had opposed the idea rushed to take credit for them. And so today they're routine. Separately, but on a parallel track, we discovered over the past 40 years that liberalizing spectrum use rights, delegating technology, service, and business model decisions to licensees is an enormously productive way to push pretty amazing new wireless stuff into the market. What's this? Is that me?
Oh, I think that might.
It's a little 1972 technology. We've seen that the complex resource sharing arrangements are most efficiently done by responsible economic parties facing profit incentives and competitive constraints. But in the USA and most other places, we have yet to learn that the process of liberalization itself needs to be liberalized, freed from its top-down structure in the public interest allocation system. So this can be done, and it has been done, if too sparingly, by US regulators, by assigning economically productive use rights on a secondary basis to bands where primary users are already scattered about. Vast amounts of useful bandwidth can be expeditiously moved into highly valued projects. More exciting, however, is the prospect of allowing the secondary rights owners, also known as overlay licensees, to bargain with incumbents to reconfigure existing networks or deployments altogether. So this allows economic trade-offs to be rationally evaluated and brings key players to internalize transaction costs and effectively eliminates the regulatory commons that haunt so many spectrum allocations today. So when these proceedings end up taking 6 to 13 years to put frequency spaces into more valuable use, as the National Broadband Plan very conservatively estimated in its 2010 report, no decision maker absorbs the cost of delays or inefficient rigidities. Perversely, indeed, many key players benefit by vetoing progress and extracting gains, while regulators themselves lose nothing. What federal official parted with a penny at the conclusion of the recent Light Squared debacle? So just as auctions seemed implausible in 1972, it today looks impossible to some that we could move beyond the present spectrum allocation regime. But the idea of abolishing a federal agency or a key structural component thereof has achieved proof of life in recent years. Fred Kahn really had no hint when he went to the Civil Aeronautics Board in 1978 that he would be the one to gently put the agency to sleep in 1985, or that this momentum would topple our oldest federal regulatory agency, the ICC, in 1996. It is helpful to remember something closer, perhaps, to where TPRC lives. An important reform effort was launched by Congressman Lionel Van Deerlin, a San Diego Democrat, head of the Communications Subcommittee, who sought to end the FCC in the late 1970s and replace it with an agency operating under something analogous to a consumer welfare standard. That was a time when inefficient regulatory structures were seen to be bringing great pain to consumers, holding back competitive forces, driving up prices, and reducing opportunities for business and technological innovation. Between 2012 and 2052, something tells me that we might confront just such a challenge in spectrum allocation. May we find a Fred Kahn to seize the moment.
I actually had planned to talk to an empty chair. But Tom is much better. Tom, you're so 1980s. Still fighting the 70s. But in a way, the question is whether we at TPRC aren't doing the same thing. We've had a really good run, but duplicating the past doesn't mean that's where things are going. So let's kind of review where we have been and where we want to go. It seems to me that TPRC's basic center of gravity had been, obviously with some exceptions, has been the infrastructure, the conduits, the carriers, the networks, their interaction, interrelations. And the governing methodology, again, center of gravity, obviously exceptions, was economics, with an emphasis that competition through opening will solve all of our problems. We didn't have to do much discussing of substance because the methodology, the competition will take care of everything. But I would suggest that perhaps now that both of these main legs of what we're doing are shaky. Haven't disappeared, but they're shaky and might require a reorientation of what we're doing in a new direction. So let's start with the disciplinary. The economics was dominant. Pretty much from the beginning, Bruce Owen, we'll hear from him tomorrow, was there, and Roger Knoll and so on. Economists set the tone, others joined. And that was great because before that, economics was not there, only lawyers ran the show and politicians. So there was progress, sure. But now the competitive environment that was supposed to solve all of our problems, where is it? Think about it. Okay, we have two wireline carriers, basically cable and phone. And in a future environment of gigabit speeds, the economies of scale, the fundamental underlying economics might in fact kind of even converge and merge those. In many countries outside of the United States and Canada and a few European countries, there is in fact only one wireline provider. Wireless, the great success story, though keep in mind that success story exists just about anywhere in the world, whether there is a TPRC or not, whether there is a liberalization-minded regulatory agency or not. It has to do with the technology, it has to do with the demand, it has to do with the fact that people want to communicate in these ways. It's perhaps much less than we like to take credit for. We're kind of like a bit of the rooster who takes credit for the sun rising. But in fact, we can observe a remonopolization. It is true that the traditional telecom carriers in particular were lazy and fat, and therefore there were competitive possibilities, particularly because of the redistributional aspects that went with it, which were politically popular. But eventually, with liberalization, there came competitive entry, MCIs, and Sprint, long distance, and so on. But ladies and gentlemen, where are they? Okay, they were supposed to be unleashed, but they were kind of like swallowed. And the reason is not a bunch of, say, regulators who are kind of taken over or something along these lines. No, I think it's because there are some fundamental economics that reassert themselves. It's not just in the United States. If you go worldwide, and we do at Columbia, I run a study of 30 countries and their market structures in 13 media industries. The United States actually is just about the most competitive one, and it's not all that competitive. So there is something that is not just a bunch of regulators doing the wrong thing here. Now, does that mean that economics is kind of passe? I wouldn't say that. In fact, I think that the emphasis then would go disciplinary-wise in two directions. One of them is much more important than kind of the Washington dimension is the kind of research and analysis in that environment, business models, pricing, user behavior, demand analysis, strategic analysis. And if you think about it, that's basically a lot what MBA type programs and schools and so on do, not economics departments. And so I think that on some level, and I'm not saying this because I teach MBAs, but I think that that's going to be one important emphasis more than in the past, and the audience here and the papers and the panels need to reflect that: finance, marketing, and so on and so forth. Now, the second orientation is really quite radically in the opposite direction, and that says that, hey guys, look, kind of if efficiency and markets and competition is not the focus, then what is? There must be some other dimensions, and that brings other goals and other disciplines that deal more with those dimensions more than economists do, such as political scientists and historians and behavioralists and even communications departments and schools, which are, I think, are kind of underrepresented here. There should be more of them. They should participate more, especially that part of those communications departments that does not believe that Walt Disney was a worse for humanity than Joseph Stalin, say. So I think that economics will therefore kind of decline. Now let me kind of move to substance. Okay, substantive work. Okay, in the past, much of the research that we have done was based on, if we take that dichotomy of conduit versus content, it was more emphasizing conduit. The sessions here on content were always kind of a bit on the marginal end of things. But I think that's going to change. Content, information itself is going to be much more the topic. Intellectual property, privacy, trade in information. And in particular, something that I'm kind of really interested in right now is the next generation of television. The television that is immersive and multilateral and interactive and three-dimensional and wiki-oriented and all kinds of things that have not existed before but now become possible because of the price declines, cost declines in transmission and in storage and in processing. There are kind of incredibly exciting things coming out of the labs that need to be integrated and made interoperable, and the standards issues and the global issues and the policy issues that are involved in those are incredibly interesting. So we will have kind of a very rich and fruitful topic of discussions. We're almost done. Another dimension of research that I think is necessary is a research on the process of policy making and policy administration. Okay, now this is really important, and we know that things are not going well, and we kind of always blame this or that situation, but I think the fundamental problem is that the industry, the technology is moving at Moore's law, the industry is moving at something less than fast, but certainly faster than the next level, which is the policy level. That is kind of essentially not only not keeping up, it's actually slowing down because there are more lawyers and more participants and more regulators and more ways to slow down the process. And so we really need to do some research on process, what is working, what is not working, how we can do these things faster. I think kind of legal process is much too important to leave it to the lawyers. Because it's not just about due process. It also has to do with the kind of the cost to society, the implications, the various direct and indirect impacts. And lastly, my topic is the internet. I think Dave alluded to this already when he talked about kind of the internet, and he didn't use the word, but I will use it, fragmentation of the internet. And not only fragmentation along the international level, China, United States, but also within the United States, each country, different approaches. I mean, Apple, with all of its kind of great glitz, I mean, it's basically destroying the model of the open internet, and there will be others, and there are others, and in the end, we will have, if we are lucky, an internet of internets. And in some ways, that has to be the focus then of the next generation of research. I've outstayed my welcome. Thank you.
So good evening, everybody. I'm really honored to be here. This conversation has kind of gone in a bunch of different directions. I actually have a handful of actually very, very specific, granular research issues that I would love to see folks out here take up. And I will say that I did get a bunch of input from my colleagues in the public interest community, some of whom I see in the audience, so I want to thank you guys for that. But I want to make just a few comments about probably the 2 or 3 things that keep me up at night, and they were mentioned today. One is the end of facilities-based competition. I think we've heard that already. I mean, we basically have cable, regional monopolies. You've got AT&T and Verizon dominating the wireless space. You know, the recent approval of the Verizon Spectrum Co. deal pretty much was a recognition by the government that facilities-based competition is over. Okay, so let's just accept that. So where do we go from there? I think that's a really, really important question. I don't know if that's a research question, but that keeps me up at night. The other thing that keeps me up at night is, and maybe Tom Hazlett might be delighted by the fact that keeps me up at night, is that I think we are perilously close to an agency that is tasked with ensuring an open, democratic, decentralized communication system that's available to everybody, is perilously close to not having any legal authority to be able to do that, or very constrained legal authority to be able to do that. And what do we do in that world? And that, you know, gets into questions of what does the next Telecommunications Act look like. But those are the 2 things. I don't think those are necessarily subjects for the kind of research, a lot of the research that's done here. But it's the kind of thing that could certainly spawn research, and the kind of thing that I think about all the time, and I would hope that folks here would think about a lot. So let me just talk a little bit about, I got about 5 or so, which I'll tick through very quickly, areas of research that I would love to see. And yeah, it's future looking, but quite honestly, it's things I've been wanting to see for a while now. For those of you who don't know, Public Knowledge is a consumer advocacy organization, and we work at the intersection of intellectual property policy and communications law. So we do a lot of the copyright work. We'll soon be getting into patent policy, which I'm delighted about. I've been trying to do that for 10 years, and we're finally going to happen. We obviously work for an open internet. We're doing some work internationally with the ITU. Several of our folks hopefully going to go to Dubai and participate in that process, which Milton Mueller tells me is not so exciting, but I'm sure they'll at least enjoy going to Dubai. But on the copyright, sort of intellectual property side, the thing that has galled me for many, many years is the fact that that area of policymaking is completely evidence-free. And there really, really needs to be unbiased research on the economic impact of piracy. We all now know that, you know, every stolen copy does not equal a lost sale. Okay, we know that. We also know, even though the Department of Commerce put out a nice big fat study on the effect of the IP-intensive industries on the economy, you know, that included the hot dog vendors near the, you know, the popcorn vendors in the movie theaters, and that's not real. And it's no good having warring, you know, industry studies either. So we really need some, you know, unbiased research on what is the actual effect? What, you know, what is, when somebody steals something, what is the impact? Or when somebody shares something on a peer-to-peer network, maybe the impact is positive. It's hard to know. There really hasn't been any, I would say, legitimate research on that, or not very much. The second is, I think, and this is very, very difficult. I remember about 6 or 7 years ago, the MacArthur Foundation brought together a whole bunch of folks, economists at the University of Texas, to try to figure out how you measure the impact on innovation and creativity of longer and stronger copyright and patent terms. So you're essentially trying to prove a negative. And I don't think anybody's really kind of come up with a methodology that can predict that accurately. But it's something, like I said, we always kind of hear the flip side. This is, you know, this is why we need longer and stronger copyright terms, because it's hurting the economy, it's hurting companies that really contribute to the GDP. But what's the flip side? You know, what's the effect on the industries that rely on fair use and looser copyright to thrive? Does it hurt them? Does it hurt them economically? Does it hurt our economy? I don't have the answer how you do that, but we certainly need that research. On the telecom side, obviously, a lot of my time and my organization's time these days is focused on what reasonable network management is. Now, I am the co-chair of the Broadband Internet Technology Advisory Group, on which Dale Hatfield is our executive director, at least for the next couple months. And several issues have come up that I really do think should be explored either by the BTAG or somebody else. First and foremost, I think is, and Dave mentioned this, is the whole congestion management question and congestion pricing questions, and how do they map? Are the congestion pricing mechanisms that are used today, do they really resolve the congestion issues? What's the correlation? I think we need to know more about what the broadband operators are doing, why they're doing it, how they set, for example, with broadband caps, why do they set them where they set them, how do they determine how they should be changed, and do they actually address the congestion problem? And if they don't address the congestion problem, what problem or what issue are they trying to address? The second network management issue that I'd like to see more explored is, I think there needs to be more technical research that helps us better understand what are so-called specialized or managed services and how they are, or if they are, distinguishable from internet access. Again, several issues have come up where ISPs have claimed that they've favored certain applications, but these are managed networks and therefore they're not subject to the network neutrality rules. But I don't think anybody's really sort of unmasked the difference between what a managed service is and what internet access service is. And I think some good technical research, again, not coming to any conclusions on any particular issue, but trying to demonstrate, can anybody in this audience really tell me what a managed service is? The FCC couldn't. That doesn't mean anything, but I think there's a lot of confusion and a lot of obfuscation, purposeful or not, that really could be unmasked. The last issue that I think is really ripe for research, and I have many more, but I only have 10 minutes. And this actually arose after I sat in the wonderful tutorial given by Bob Cannon, I don't know if he's still here, on peering. And even though I've been doing this kind of work for over 20 plus years, I learned so much. And that's a really, really scary thought that I knew so little about peering. And I actually think that many policymakers know very, very little about peering. I think they know very little about the traffic flow on that peering. I think they know very little about the effect of consolidation on that peering. So Bob kind of walked us through like the 3 different periods of peering, and how it used to sort of be a very open and friendly and very competitive market, and then sort of things have kind of changed and people are trying to extract more rents out of peering now. It's a very different environment, and I asked him the question, I said, so what? Does it matter? How does it affect consumers? How does it affect edge providers? I have no idea. And I think has been very, very little research into the effect of consolidation and the traffic flows. And it impacts a lot of things. It impacts cybersecurity, it affects privacy, it affects piracy, it affects trying to control spam. So I've just in the last several hours become increasingly concerned and increasingly fascinated by sort of the whole peering market, and I think much more research needs to be done there.
Great. Thanks, Gigi. Thanks everybody for your thoughts on some of the research needs going forward.